As we head into the July 4th holiday here on the Jersey Magazine, I'm Jim Monahan, and my guest, he is a local realtor by trade. He is a local historian as well. Scott Spelker, good morning and welcome to the DHA Jersey Magazine.
Good morning, Jim. Glad to be here.
So I want to ask you first, what piqued your interest in local history?
I just wanted to be ridiculed by my sons. So rather than collecting baseball, cards that were going to be very valuable someday, I collected Madison memorabilia only to be ridiculed by my boys. No, I think the first thing that really was, like most people, I guess I didn't kind of come to being interested in history till I was a little bit older. But I was at a buddy of mine's house. We both grew up in Madison, and he had a map on the wall from, I want to say, either 1887 or 1910. And it was the neighborhood that I grew up in. And it showed like there were no houses, pretty much. It was just all fields and everything like that. There were a bunch of big estates. And I just thought it was pretty wild how, a pretty developed community like Madison is now, how it was all these estates and huge properties and everything. So that was really the first thing that kind of piqued my interest in, the history of the town.
I think I've seen that map that you're talking about. My neighborhood also did not exist. And as a matter of fact, my neighborhood where I live didn't even exist until the late 1950s. It was one of those post-World War II baby boom, let's throw a bunch of houses up. They were all identical Cape Cods. Many of them have been added onto over the years, but I think it was probably 1957. So it's really cool to see what the town did look like back in the 1800s and even further back. And I want to go back because we know about the colonial history of this area, but I'm not sure that a lot of people understand the rich colonial history of Madison in particular, which at one time was called Bottle Hill. Where did that name come from?
Right. Yeah, I'll tell you what, listen, Madison's history is really kind of exceptional. I do a trolley tour. I try to do it every year. I don't drive the trolley. I get somebody who brings in a trolley, but I dress like a $3 bill. And we go around the town for about an hour and 15 minutes, and people come out of the other side of this tour just pretty blown away by just how much interesting history there is. And you had, Revolutionary War history. You've got basically the richest people in the United States at summer homes, kind of in Madison and Morristown. They're like the Bill Gates and the Jeff Bezos of their time. They had these just absolutely stunning mansions that they would be here for 3 weeks. So you had that, and then you had the rose growing industry, and not just any rose. Madison was the biggest rose grower in the United States, the town of Madison. So there was a lot of different interesting, history. But to answer your question about Bottle Hill, it was in fact originally called South Hanover, Madison. And West Hanover was actually Morristown, and Hanover over by kind of Home Depot and Whippany, that area was kind of the original place that everything was settled, was really kind of there. So Madison was South Hanover, Chatham was always Chatham. And then we gradually became Bottle Hill. And there's a lot of different kind of explanations for why the name Bottle Hill. But the most plausible, in my view, is there's a guy named Bud, was the last name, in Chatham, and he owned a ton of land. And quite a bit of it extended into Madison, what was current Madison. And if you look at one of these really old maps from the 1700s, it's really just like a hand-drawn surveyor's map. And you can see a big portion of the land, especially the side part of Madison that's closer to Chatham. It was like a bottle, and Bud owned a big portion of this land, and it really did look like a bottle. And if you look at Madison, there, the Woodland Road section and everything is pretty elevated due to the the glaciers of millions of years ago. So it's kind of makes sense. It's this. You look at this map, you see this bottle that Madison does have some hilly sections, and so that's where became known as Bottle Hill. And it's going to stay Bottle Hill, and it's on maps. I have a map from, I think it was the late 1700s, and it mentions Bottle Hill. I've got a letter that was written from somebody in Springfield to somebody in Bottle Hill. But then it starts to sound a little bit too much like a drinking town. There was a temperance movements where everybody got all up in arms about how much drinking was going on all over the country. So a bunch of people in Bottle Hill got together and said, we got to change the name of our town. It sounds like a drinking town. So it passes by a vote of, I believe, 5-4. I think the deciding vote was one of the Burnett's, and Jim Burnett is still here. This has got to be a relative 5 generations back.
Wow.
But Jim Burnett still works. He works for the town, and he's James Burnett, I think the 4th or 5th. And it was one of his relatives that cast a deciding vote in 1834 to change the name from Bottle Hill to Madison.
And
After
of course,
James
Madison,
Madison.
after James Madison, the fourth president. There's one area in particular of town that interests me, and it's labeled on a part of the street sides as an historical district. And there's a couple of homes, the Sayer home, I believe the Miller home is the other one. What's the significance of those two homes, Scott?
Well, the significance of the Sayer home is I sold it. I think that should be on a plaque somewhere. Yeah, no, it was listed by the Spelker real estate team and actually brought the buyer for it. It's actually an exceptional home. And when I do that trolley tour, I was always able to get our tour into the house so they could see the Revolutionary War house. And since I brought the buyer, I kind of said to him, listen, buddy, you got to hook me up here. When I do my trolley tour, you got to let 20 something people come in twice over a course of 3 hours. So, the Luke Miller house is, first of all, just to give you an idea of the population back then, Morristown had about 300 people. And I just read something recently that Chatham at the time had about 50 homes. So, and Chatham was a little bit bigger than Madison at the time, or Bottle Hill as it was called. So I would say, Bottle Hill probably had, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 homes, and there probably were about, at best, 100 people. So the Luke Miller house was on one of the original streets of Madison. It's Ridgedale Avenue. It's been around for hundreds of years. It was an Indian foot trail. I mean, literally, it was just like a path that the Native Americans would come from northern New Jersey down to the Jersey Shore in the summer, and they would basically stop, along the way at Rosedale as well, because there was, water there as well. And they would go hunting there. So the Luke Miller house has been around since, I believe, somewhere around 1750. And Washington did not stay there. He did not, but Washington did spend 2 winters in Morristown in 1777 and 1780. I'm more interested in the 1777 one because he had just come off of a huge upset. I mean, in Trenton, where they beat the Hessians on Christmas Eve. Washington crosses the Delaware. I mean, he was getting his tail kicked every which way, and there were a lot of people behind the scenes calling for Washington's ouster. So he finally gets a win, and after that win, he shoots up to Princeton. There's a short battle in Princeton, and then he hightails it up to Morristown for the winter. Basically, locks down his one good win. And that winter, there's a lot of time in the winter time where they're not fighting. It was basically understood there was a ceasefire. So he would come into Madison. He would come into Chatham. His offices were put up in the homes in Madison and Chatham. So he would have definitely visited the Luke Miller house. And Luke Miller's son was, I think, a captain, and I think Luke Miller was a colonel. But they served in the militia, and Washington would have definitely visited their house. Now, the Sayre house is a little bit different in that General Mad Anthony Wayne stayed in that house for one winter, and Wayne was known for wine, women, and song, which was really, he was they called him mad, not like angry, but crazy. He was basically known for wine, women, and song, which was not a really good matchup because Sayre was Deacon Ephraim Sayre, and he was very like a clergy almost, so putting the two of them together was really not a good idea, and it didn't last, but it lasted that one winter, and it was like, he's not coming back. So that's the significance of the Sayre house, is that really, one of the best generals for the Revolutionary War did stay in that house for that first important winter of 1777.
And of course, for DHA listeners who are familiar with that area, the Sayre house, Anthony Wayne, well, that's where Sayre Court and Wayne Boulevard and Anthony Drive, those names come from. One other road that fascinated me, and I don't know how true Wikipedia is on this, but King's Road, which runs parallel to Main Street. Is it true that was a toll road set up by the King of England?
No, it was called the King's Highway before it was King's Road, and it was one of the original, there was no Main Street. So what we know as Main Street in Madison did not exist. But around 1804, this is a good 25 years after the beginning of the Revolutionary War, They do build, I think it was called the Morris Turnpike, and there was a toll road. It was a toll road. That's why Shunpike is called Shunpike, because you were shunning the pike. The pike was that big thing that came down, like, the gate at the Garden State Parkway. So the Kings Highway was always a toll-free road. And it was one of the earliest, you're talking about 1740, 1750s. You start to get to around I think it was 1804, they put Main Street in. And there was a toll. And one of the tolls is where Main Street Subs is.
Oh, okay.
Right where Main Street Subs is. So there were stories that people would be coming from the east, from Newark or Elizabeth, and they were on the way up to maybe Morristown or further, and they would basically just take the horses and cruise around the outside of that pike and basically take off like a shot and basically blow through the toll. It's like when you go down the parkway, you used to have to throw quarters in that thing, and you just basically honk your horn. You never threw any money and just kept going. So yeah, there was definitely people dodging the toll back then, but the Kings Highway was never a toll road.
Scott, for WDHA listeners who want to learn more about the history of Madison and maybe some other surrounding areas as well, where do you recommend they go?
Well, I'm going to be doing some walking tours. I'm also going to start doing some videos, like just kind of vignettes, short and sweet, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, clips of different parts around Madison. So they should look for that. It'll probably be showing up on like one of those Madison area parents websites or something like that. But there's a lot of different books that have been written on the history of Madison and that deal with different time periods and stuff like that. But the one by Esposito, which I'm sure you can find on Amazon, they're doing a rewrite on that now, but I would say that's kind of the definitive version. I think it's called Heritage Trail, and it's by last name was Esposito, but you could probably find that on Amazon. Fantastic book. And then from there, you just kind of dig a little bit dig a little deeper. You can go to the Madison Library. I'm sure there's like a whole section in there you could check out different books on the history of Madison. But all of them are interesting for their own particular reason. Like there's just, one that's just dealt strictly with living in Madison in 1920 to 1930 and what life was like, and how these trucks little horse and wagons would come up and sell desserts, or they would sell grocery, vegetables or meats. And basically it was almost like delivery services we have now, but it just really gives you a feel for what life was like in that period of time. There's another fantastic one written by, I'm trying to remember the guy's last name. It's a Laco, but it was basically growing up in the early 1900s in the Italian section of North Street, South Street, and what that was like back then as well. And one of the things I learned was, when I was growing up, that whole area by Lucy D was heavily Italian. And what I learned was it was actually Irish first. If you look at the maps from 1887, it's all Irish names. But by 1910, it had changed over, and there were a lot of, it was mostly Italian. So that's also kind of an interesting thing, is how the demographics, because, the French were the first ones here that started the Catholic Church. And, 1805 is really the beginning of Madison. St. Vincent's Church is one of the biggest and most prominent churches in all of North Jersey. And it was started by the French. So that's kind of neat. And if you look at so many of the bishops that served in New York City at St. Patrick's Cathedral, they had been in Madison first. It was it's just an incredible amount of history in this town. It really is. And it's just, the more you find out about it, you'll never look at the town the same. And that's one of the great things about that trolley tours, is when you're coming down Kings Road, you're going to start thinking of it as the Kings Highway. And Washington's troops, when they went and attacked Yorktown, which ended the Revolutionary War in 1781, that was the knockout punch. It was launched from Chatham. Almost every soldier in the army, all of the French soldiers, and everybody thought they were going to be attacking New York. And Washington took off at like 4 or 5 in the morning, came up the Kings Highway, up Union Avenue, up Woodland Road, which was called, it was High Street at one point, but probably didn't even have a name, down Garfield, through New Vernon, down to Philadelphia. By the time Clinton in New York found out that Washington wasn't attacking him in New York, he was already in Philadelphia. He joined with the French, who had ships at sea. They basically captured 7,000 troops of Cornwallis, and that was the knockout punch of the Revolutionary War, and it was launched from Chatham, New Jersey.
That's a great story. I hope you do another one of those magical mystery tours on the
I
trail.
will. Yeah, look for that. And especially those little videos I plan on doing. My son needs a summer job, so I think I'm going to make him just drag him around and have him film his old man. But thanks for having me on the show. And And I'd be happy to do, I know there's something, I could do something in October because I did a tour on the Cluxon murder. And I did it this past fall because it was the 100th anniversary, a really wild story of basically a young lady, maybe 11 years old, that was murdered by Fairview Avenue and Ridgedale Avenue by a 15-year-old well-to-do Cluxon family kid. And it made international papers. It was front page with the World Series information that was going on. It's a really wild story. So maybe in October you have me back on for that.
That would be great. Scott Spelker, thanks for being my guest this morning here on the Jersey Magazine.
You're most welcome.